So now we're entering the 17th century, and Europe is divided between Catholics and Protestants of different varieties. Both kings and religious leaders are fighting to gain or regain adherents. Sometimes they use the printing press as a weapon, sometimes they duke it out on the battlefield, and sometimes the fight is carried out in the world of art. There is Protestant Baroque art, especially in the Netherlands, but we're going to start with the Baroque art of the Catholic Counter-Reformation and the regions that led the Counter-Reformation fight, Italy and Spain. So from 1545 to 1563, the Council of Trent had met in Trento, Italy to hammer out a strategy for fighting Protestants. The council strongly condemned Protestant doctrines, but it also ordered some pretty significant changes to church administration and discipline. The intention was to try to address some of the corruption that had sparked Luther's attack and had many people within the church concerned. So that's a lot of history in a sentence or two, but for our purposes, it's most important to know that the Council of Trent strongly upheld the use of religious images, and that the church seized on art as a weapon in its fight against Protestantism. It was a smart move. The Protestant churches were austere, they didn't have art, they sometimes didn't even have music, and this appealed to the intellect, maybe, but it had a hard time competing with art's appeal to the human spirit. So here's another one of those quick summary slides. The church and its artists it patronized basically decided to go with high drama, and drama is a word that's used all the time to describe Baroque art. Baroque art is theater. It's big, it's boldly colored, it's filled with movement and emotion. It has spiraling figures and tantalizing diagonals of sight. It was an art designed to excite, inflame. We'll return to the points on this slide repeatedly, so just consider this an introduction. In this lecture, I'm going to look at the stage setting for these Baroque productions. That is Baroque churches and also at Baroque sculpture. So here's an early Baroque church. In many ways, it's really, I would say, a transitional church between the Renaissance and Baroque. So you see a lot of classical elements, the Corinthian columns and the pediments, for example. But you also begin to see more of the curving lines and ornate carving that came to characterize Baroque. The same artist, Carlos Maderno, took on the challenge of once again reworking the facade of St. Peter's. Note in the process that Michelangelo's dome gets shoved to the back and loses some of its prominence. I'm not sure it was really a good thing for St. Peter's that it had a whole series of different architects. Here we see the succession of plans, and as these floor plans demonstrate, the design of the church continued to evolve into a larger structure with a bigger nave. The bigger nave created more separation between the priests and the congregation, but it was also a lot more suitable for holding large crowds and staging the kind of grand processions that the new militant or religious order, the Jesuits, particularly liked. And the Jesuits were basically in the front lines of the fight to preserve and expand Catholicism. The most dramatic change to St. Peter's in this period was not really its facade, but the huge piazza that still welcomes worshipers to the Eternal City. Here we see a plan. The architect who designed this piazza and the canopy over the tomb of St. Peter was also the chief sculptor of the Counter-Reformation. He's a towering artistic figure, shows up on the AP art history exam all the time, and somebody you should know, even for reasons beyond the AP art history exam. So his name was Gian Lorenzo Bernini. Here's a self-portrait. I have what I think is a great video on Bernini. This is probably wishful thinking, but I really think you'd enjoy the entire video, and it would be a very good way to learn about the Counter-Reformation Rome. It contains a lot of sex and gore, if that's an incentive. At any rate, we don't have time in class for the whole video. But let's begin with this introduction to Bernini's sculpture, move to architecture with a detour to Bernini's great rival and fellow Baroque architect Borromini. Bernini was the son of a sculptor and a child prodigy who attracted the interest of the church when he was still a young boy and became friendly with a succession of popes. We pick up his story as he arrives in Rome. Note the reference to Caravaggio, the other artist who dominated Rome. He's up next. Okay, we've seen a lot of Davids in this course, so stop for a moment and consider how Bernini's rendition of the story breaks new ground. First, how is it not like the Discobolus, to which Bernini's David bears a superficial resemblance? Well, I would say the disc thrower is more static, really more frozen in time. Bernini's David is all coiled action about to spring. It reaches into the space around it, what art analysts call negative space. This David is not Donatello's contemplative youth. It's not Michelangelo's calm warrior. He is an intense, furious fighter out to destroy an enemy, save his people. You can see this comparison here. It really illustrates the move from the early Renaissance to the High Renaissance to the Baroque. And as you might expect, it's a comparison that the College Board likes to make. So here's another famous Bernini sculpture. It's one that's not in your book. Basically, Apollo has fallen in love with Daphne, her father, who's a river god, is alarmed at this planned seduction and turns her into a tree. Let's return to the video for a closer look at this work and the sensuality of Baroque sculpture in general. I mentioned earlier that Bernini was an architect as well as a sculptor. His great rival was Francesco Borromini, who was also an architect favored by the popes. Our video gives an interesting account of their rivalry, and perhaps more to the point, it gives you a good look at several pieces of Baroque architecture. I think these churches are better seen on a video than on slides. I'm assuming that you've now watched the video clip. I hope you've watched the video clip. So take a closer look at this slide of the Baldacci. What Baroque features do you see? Well, once again, we see twisted figures. This time it's columns. We see ornate decoration, really a kind of over-the-top drama that sets the stage for religious celebrations that says very, very important things are happening here. This is attracting the faithful with spectacle in a very big way. Here, by the way, is the Borromini church you saw in the video. So again, note the undulating curves, alternating between convex and concave surfaces, the extremely ornate geometric pattern of the dome, the carving on the facade. Renaissance simplicity is a distant memory. And in that spirit, look at that. I'm going to end with this all too brief look. I'm going to end this all too brief look at Baroque sculpture and architecture and at Bernini with his famous sculpture of the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. He designed the chapel in which it was housed. I would say it's pretty over the top, Bernini at his most opulent. But here is the sculpture itself. It's really an extraordinary statue with its twisting figure and profound emotion. But what kind of ecstasy is she experiencing? I really hope you'll find the time to watch this final, and I would say somewhat shocking clip from the Bernini video. I think this may be another moment where our art history class veers into an R rating. Bernini was both profoundly religious and profoundly sensual, and in that he reflected the age. These two sides of his artistic temperament merge in this spectacular but somewhat controversial sculpture. So here's a question that you might want to open next class with. Is this really an appropriate sculptural depiction of a saint? By the way, the story of St. Teresa, who is a 16th century figure, also can give you an insight into the religious spirit of the age, of the Counter-Reformation, and especially the religious fervor that gripped Spain, where we will be traveling very soon.